Thank you all for coming. My name is Jessica, and I was an Education Public Programs intern at Zoo Atlanta this past summer. So a little history about Zoo Atlanta. It's Atlanta's oldest cultural attraction. It was actually started with abandoned circus animals that were donated to the city of Atlanta. And the collection has grown throughout the years because of donations from private philanthropists and sponsors and things of that nature. So in 1984, there was a series of highly publicized events that highlighted the deteriorating conditions at the zoo, and it actually prompted Parade magazine to label the zoo as one of the top 10 worst institutions in the nation, which that kind of sucks. So this kind of sparked major overhauls. There was new management and a lot of things that kind of got the zoo back on track to where it is today as one of the best in the nation. And what really kind of marked that milestone was in 1990 when giant pandas arrived at the zoo from the Chengdu Research Facility in China. So there are actually only 4 zoos in the United States that are entrusted with giant pandas. It's Zoo Atlanta, the San Diego Zoo, the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., and the Memphis Zoo. So today, the zoo is AZA accredited, so the Association of Zoos and Aquariums has recognized that Zoo Atlanta meets or exceeds the standards for housing wild animals. There are about 4,000 visitors to the zoo on a daily basis, which is good because the zoo's 4 purposes are recreation, research, education, and conservation. So obviously it is a recreation experience. We want our guests to come, we want them to have a good time, but we want to educate them as well and get them involved in conservation. And the zoo is actually one of the largest contributors to research for giant pandas and other endangered species that are housed at the zoo. So the personal goals of my internship were to impart awareness of conservation issues in hopes of inspiring others to environmental action. So an example of that is this billboard here in the middle. So that's one of our sustainable palm oil billboards. That's one of our largest talking points when it comes to conservation with our guests. So palm oil is a type of vegetable oil. It's not bad. It's in our food, it's in our shampoos, it's in pretty much everything we use on a daily basis. So we want people to use sustainable palm oil because companies that don't use sustainable palm oil are taking away tiger habitat, orangutan habitat. They don't treat their workers fairly. So this is really an incentive for companies to want to use it. Because there's an app that you can get. This was kind of our call to action for our guests. They could get an app and see what things they're buying use sustainable palm oil and what things don't. And if something they really, really like doesn't use sustainable palm oil, well, we would tell them, write the company, tell them you want them to use sustainable palm oil, and that's kind of a simple way for them to get involved with conservation. So another goal was to provide positive guest experiences and relations. So an example of that is this picture right over here. That's one of our programs called Scaly Slimy Survivor. It takes place in our new reptile house, and it is based off the show Survivor. So there are little challenges that our teams can compete in. My personal favorite is the basilisk challenge. So that's how we would educate our guests about the green basilisk lizard. So you can see these little air pads, so we called them on the floor, the little spots. So they represented how the basilisk lizard runs on water. They actually run so fast that they create air pads under their feet. And so that was a really cool fact that the guests could learn and also participate in. Another example is this one right over here. This is our game called Forage Like a Cory. So this is a cory bustard, this big bird up here. They're actually the largest species of bird capable of flight, and that was always a cool fact to tell them. So a male in breeding plumage, like Snake right here, that's his name, weighs up to 40 pounds, but they can still fly. So I'm sure everyone in here knows what an opportunistic omnivore is, but a lot of our guests did not. So the best way we had to illustrate that was to make a fun game that the kids could play. So they would take their cory beaks, these brightly colored tongues, and forage around in the grass for things that a cory bustard would eat. And another goal for me was to experience a possible future career and kind of open the door to more opportunities like it with interpretation and education. So for my daily tasks, I kind of put an example schedule up here. So it was broken down into hourly blocks, and our days were from 9:30 to 5. So mostly it's just a lot of interp, just a lot of talking to people, whether it's giving them directions or standing outside an exhibit and telling people cool facts about your favorite animal, really. And so one other thing we did was what I did here on this particular day is working in the ARC, which is the Education Action Resource Center. It's where all the education offices are housed. And we would work on new programs, programs that change every month, like Zoo's Clues here. It's a mystery that we change every month that guests can solve with their kids. So we were working on the next mystery, figuring out what clues we wanted to use and where we wanted to hide them in the zoo. So for general interp, this is an example of when we just got our alligators, so it was a really busy day at Scaly Slimy. And I had an alligator skull, so it was really cool because I could talk about the difference between alligators and crocodiles, and the guests always wanted to touch the teeth, and that was just a really fun experience. And here in this bottom right corner, I'm at the giant panda exhibit with a giant panda skull, so I could show people the skull and talk about their adaptations because they are carnivores. That surprised a lot of people. And this is always a very busy exhibit. I was there for an hour one day and I talked to over 500 people. And you may say, well, how in the world did you know you talked to over 500 people in 1 hour? Well, this little clicker here, we count how many people we talk to. It's part of our job, and we call them our impact numbers. So we record them every day to see what guests are most interested in and who you talk to the most. And we had a friendly competition where we would rank who had the most impact numbers out of all the education staff. So number 8's pretty good for an intern that's only there for a couple days out of the week. So personally, I contributed to my work environment because I was capable of doing office work, so data tracking, as well as menial tasks like shredding papers. But I was also good with interpersonal communication and public speaking, so leading programs, things like that. Here, this is a picture of our giraffe deck. That's Itana. He's a 4-year-old male giraffe. We had a program called giraffe feeding, where guests could feed the giraffes. That's why it's called giraffe feeding. And we have this sign here. It says watch your head, so we have a line that people have to stay behind. So basically my job, whenever I helped with that, was to make sure they stayed behind the line and answer any questions while the giraffe guides, the people who are paid to work with the giraffes, handle the food. And so the last thing that I contributed was I was good with the creative projects, so coming up with new programs, coming up with new mysteries for Zoo's Clues, and also towards the end of my internship there was a newsletter that went out to the zoo members, and there was an arts and crafts section that parents could do with their kids, and my boss handed me a list of arts and crafts and said, do these today. Okay, sounds good. So one of them was to make paper plate masks of nocturnal animals. So I made the raccoon and the clouded leopard, and another intern made the owl. And then we found a nice picturesque spot to take a picture, and it was included in the newsletter, so I'm published in a way, which is pretty cool. I also included my total hours, so I ended up working 265 and a half hours, which sounds like a lot, but it went by way too quickly. I wish I could have stayed a little longer. So Warnell definitely helped a lot. So as wildlife professionals, we all know that we're in the public eye. Our work can often be misconstrued. And so when you're working with a sensitive biofact, such as a tiger pelt, and a child comes up and asks you what happens to the tiger, well, you can't lie to them, but you have to be very sensitive about the way you handle that. So that was a lot easier for me to transition into with my Warnell background. A lot of the other interns were like, oh God, I don't know what to say. So Warnell definitely helped me maintain the fun message, but also the serious education message as well. All right, does anybody have any questions?